You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the latest People Agenda podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners. Thank you as always for joining us. And today I'm doing an all-in-person podcast from Lace Towers, one of the meeting rooms that we have in Lace Towers. And I have two fabulous guests with me to talk AI and ESG myth busting. I'm going to call this the statements episode because I'm going to put some statements to our two fabulous guests. One's a lacer, one is from an organisation which we are very much friends with here at Lace Partners. I'm going to introduce them in a second, but yes, we're going to do a statements episode today. I'm going to read out some statements and they're going to give me their thoughts about it in terms of facts and then some actions as well. But let's bring them in, starting with ladies first. It's Beth Scaysbrook, who is the Chief Client Officer at Addidat. Beth, how are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. It's lovely to have you on. And thank you very much for coming along and being joined by myself and the wonderful Martin Colyer, who is our Head of AI and Innovation. How are you doing, mate? You all right?
Very good.
You excited for this one?
I'm always excited to do this.
You should be. It was your idea.
I know.
For it.
I know. Exactly. If I wasn't, we'd be in trouble.
So you guys have obviously got a little bit of a heads up on some of the statements. You've had some chance to think about it. But before we go into the statements themselves, I think it's probably worth for those people listening in who maybe have never heard of Addidat before, or yourself, Beth, just giving us a little bit of background to yourself and then also the business. And then you are not allowed to leave this room until we do my fundamentally different question. So we'll do that next. But do you want to kick off a little bit about yourself and then also Addidat?
Yeah, certainly. I guess my background is it's in consulting, previously in asset management, and now Chief Client Officer and co-founder at Addidat. Addidat is a leading provider of ESG data and consulting services to UK growth companies, and our sort of objective and ethos really is helping to build long-term resilient businesses in that UK growth market, helping both companies and their investors.
Cool. Okay. Martin, fundamentally different question time.
Go for it.
The challenge that I shall set before you is you have some sort of infinity gauntlet style. You can make things disappear. You can have one Christmas song that you can make disappear. I thought about going positive here. Let's do a bit Grinchy.
Given that we're probably going to be hearing it about 1 million times, it's going to feel like some sort of Twilight Zone. Easy. Cliff Richard, mistletoe wine.
Really?
Yeah, it absolutely grinds my gear. And my partner insists on singing it to me at the top of her voice continually for the month of December.
Oh my God. Now that is a totally acceptable reason. I do a bit of Cliff though.
It's not on the basis of her singing, by the way, because I'll get in trouble otherwise, but it's just...
Of course. I said I do like a bit of Cliff. No, I like that one song, Cliff. The rest of them, not really. So for me, it would be Wham because of that gosh darn awful, let's do Whamageddon. But probably the less said about that, the better. And just to complete the set, before we start talking about the serious stuff, Beth, what's yours?
I'm probably going to have to be Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. And I know it's controversial, but...
that is controversial. That's going to have a few people. That's going to have a few listeners, maybe a few people in the comments saying, how dare you? How dare you? Get back to talking about AI and ESG after that absolute blasphemy that you've done there. Okay, let's talk about it. We've got a series of statements. I'm going to start with our guest first, Martin, then give us your view. But statement number one, AI will replace most jobs. And honestly, I think I've heard this conversation piece in one way or another about 1 billion times. So it'd be really interesting to get an Addidat perspective, but then also a Lace perspective as well. So yeah, that's statement number one. AI will replace most jobs.
So I think it's a really controversial topic, and AI is already starting to impact the jobs that are out there, particularly, for example, a number of the graduate jobs that we're seeing have been cut. I think we don't really know yet, as is probably going to be one of the themes as we go through today's discussion. We don't really know the full extent as to how that's going to evolve. I think ultimately it's going to change how companies are recruiting and what those jobs actually will be. But I think it's going to be an evolution rather than a revolution. And ultimately, it's going to warrant a lot of heads around the table to make sure the right decisions are being made on this.
Yeah, 100%. There's that stat, isn't there? I can't remember the exact details, but everyone keeps trotting out that World Economic Forum stat of something like 75% of all jobs are in 5 years' time won't exist, or the jobs of today won't exist in 5 years' time. Martin, your thoughts on that? AI will replace most jobs.
Yeah, and I guess this is almost where part of the conversation started, around thinking about what is it that the CPO needs to be thinking about relative to this huge topic. But in truth, this isn't the first time we've gone through a change. It might be a slightly different order of magnitude, but technology or the industrial revolutions has always created a difference in the types of jobs that we have. The difference is going to be on the types of work that we do, and therefore those jobs are going to evolve to start to accommodate the different types of activity that people perform within a business. So the jobs are going to potentially change as a result, but are they fundamentally going to disappear? No. There's even some evidence that as a result of this, different types and more jobs start to come from it because of the possibilities that it starts to open up. So we're early stages, like Beth says, but it just doesn't feel like that. There's no Jobageddon coming.
No, exactly. We're not going to turn into this world where, do you remember the movie WALL-E, where they all just suddenly didn't have work anymore because it was all done by the machines? It's not that world. I'm going to move on, though, from my terrible Disney references into statement number 2. Martin, you can kick this one off. AI has nothing to do with ESG.
Clearly, it does. Just, I think it's probably more a case that the topic of conversation is not necessarily where the two things are being drawn together wholly in many conversations at the moment. So if we think around, and I will talk to what I know, but clearly I'll be handing over to the expert shortly, the topics that we're hearing very much around what are the environmental impacts of AI, given the increasing use of data centers that are popping up, clearly, because the evolution of AI is heavily being driven by the nature of whether those data centers can come online. A data center can be quite heavy in terms of electricity use, and then you've got the downstream impacts of those things. Similarly, I think if we look at somewhere some of the big tech companies are going at the moment, then they're even looking at how they can provide some of their own energy sources for some of the new models that they're having to train. So quite what it looks like, I think we're still in a point where it's going to evolve, but a specific nature of it at the moment, there is clearly an impact. And I've not even talked about the social and the governance angles, but we're hearing so much in the press around what's the societal impact of AI on how we engage person to person, or even person to whatever your favorite large language model might be. Increasingly, we're seeing that as a theme. So I think we're going to find out through time what the mental health implications are and what that then will start to look like in turn. To say it doesn't have an impact, I think, is false, and hence why a lot of where our conversation started, actually as a CPO, as a custodian of people, there's clearly going to be an impact somehow. We just don't quite know what it is yet.
Beth?
ESG should build long-term business resilience in businesses by investing in less tangible but ultimately financially material factors, and that ultimately outlive your typical remuneration and strategic cycles and plans. And when you think about AI, there are lots of sort of similarities when you think about the sort of risk profile and opportunity profile as with something like climate, actually. And we will, I'm sure, come on to a bit more about that. But I guess ultimately how it does cover ESG, you've got the environmental and the energy and the water implications there. The social, the customer privacy is quite a big one, as well as the employee impacts. And then from a governance perspective, what's the risk framework that you're putting around it, as well as cybersecurity. And yeah, I'm sure there's lots more in there as well, but they're the kind of the key ones.
I'll ask you both a question. I'm going off piece a little bit on the statements bit here, because I think this is quite interesting. Do you think that people think of ESG and you think about structures and processes to be put in place? This is something that we aim to deliver on. This is one of our sort of policies. It's an approach. Do you think that because AI seems to just cut across everything, and because it isn't just a tool, it's not just a large language model, it's the way you work, it is both tangible and intangible? Do you think that's why people have a struggle linking the two together? Or what's your kind of view on some of that?
So I guess there is an overlap in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
So there is, how does AI impact the ESG factors that you're already thinking about? So one thing it's a pretty standard process to go through when you're trying to work out what a firm's ESG strategy should be, and that will be unique to the company depending on lots of different factors. And so what you do is what's called a materiality assessment, and you work out which bits of E, S and G are actually the most financially material or impact, if you're thinking of it from an impact lens as well, to the business. AI will shift that as to what actually is impactful, and it will probably move the dial. It might bring new topics in, and it might shift the dial on and move some of those things around the impact matrix that you create with it. But it will also have quite a significant impact. We're already seeing some incredible models that are coming out through climate, enabling better data and decision useful data that's coming through as well. And ultimately, I think it will also help how companies are. One of the biggest pains on ESG is reporting, and how do you report effectively without producing 20-page ESG reports? And we spend a lot of time helping companies to reduce those reports down, and AI is fantastic at helping you to do a large language model. It's brilliant at doing some of those things. So I think there is multi-layers as to how companies should be thinking about it.
Yeah, I really love that answer as well, that multi-layered kind of thing. Because I don't think people either do think of it like that or they don't. But do you want to build on that?
I guess a little bit. And it's probably taking a step back, again, looking at the macro picture of, if we consider this in like industrial revolutions, then there was a very clear impact to the industrial revolution because of coal pumping out, or smoke pumping out of stations through coal fire power. We've still got remnants of that clearly in some areas, but to go, hang on a minute, where is the sort of fumes from what an AI model is going to produce? It's almost the invisible angle to it, which I think is why there's a struggle to go, oh yeah, but really? I don't think about data centers day to day that much. We do, but people generally don't think about data centers day to day and the energy consumption thereof of a data center, for instance. So you can see why, and it's completely understandable, but there's almost an amplification effect of the more of those that are needed, the more power we're looking for. It's the equivalent of what's the coal that I'm pumping into my power station is, and the very visible impact of it.
One of the biggest things that's being debated in the investor community at the moment is is there enough natural capital to support the growth projection of these firms?
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. It might be worth digging into that in a bit. Statement number 3, we're going to go HR focus now, because the first couple has been very much business lens. So we're going to drill down a little bit onto, after all, this is a HR podcast, so the people agenda. AI is too risky to use in HR. Who wants to take first stab at that?
I'll go first. I'll jump in there. Again, it is looking at the different profiles and why this topic spans both sort of topic areas of AI and ESG, because largely from one angle, it does come down to what's my internal governance. Because if I'm thinking about why people, or what the benefits are of using AI, they're clearly the counter to that as well. Actually, my data is being fed through to something and I can't quite see what's in the black box of how a decision is being made, whether bias is occurring as a result of whatever the model is producing. Then there's a potential reluctance to that. The flip of that is then, hang on a minute, we need to talk to and ensure that the vendors that are creating these models are giving the transparency that's needed, so we can actually challenge, we can audit, we can see, and therefore we can guarantee that where there is sort of areas that might be more risk heavy, and hence why people don't want to engage with it, that we've got answers to that. Another interesting angle is almost from an employee perspective, where people might say, I don't necessarily want to have my performance review completed by an agent of some description, but it might be that actually the agent is better in allocating tasks to people because they're purely based on a logic, as opposed to the inherent biases that we have, or inaccuracies, etc., that come from us as people and the fallibility of humans. So you can see that there is some research into that, say that if you frame the question one way, employees will immediately go, no, I will be under control. If you frame it the other way, to go, this will help you allocate. Oh, actually, yes, I can see the benefits of it. So I think taking it from a couple of different angles, one which is much more governance, security, and the privacy of data and transparency, but then the other is the real material impact of what it feels like to engage with AI. You can see where the debate starts to go.
And where and how you communicate to that person as to how it's going to be leveraged. Beth, What do you think?
So agree totally and think about those two angles from an employee perspective. I think, as with everything, there's got to be the communications around it and getting that right. But I think ultimately it's going to be a balance of both, and explaining the benefits of AI and using it and understanding what the shortfalls are. So it's inputting, but not overriding what's being done in the thought process. And I think some of the ways that I use this today is really that kind of thought partnering kind of approach, and actually it could be much better. Granted, humans have built it, so there are biases in there, and it's based off the internet where there are hundreds of biases, so it's not unbiased, but it's looking at lots of different ones, and therefore it's giving not just a single person's bias, which would be your manager. So I think there are, for getting some perhaps fair reviews and data-driven views that feed into that performance, I think it's a real opportunity for firms to be using that.
Yep. Firms, HR, there's all types of business functions, the way in which we've done work, as we've already talked about. Statement number 4, we're very much getting into the E part of ESG here. There's some interesting stats, actually, that might be worth just framing this. So the statement is AI will increase our carbon footprint, so it can't be sustainable. And we've started to touch on that. And I find it quite fascinating when I speak to friends or you're in the pub, things like that, and you start to talk about AI or the cloud. And how do you think the cloud exists? It doesn't exist out of fresh air.
Yeah.
You need to have physical things like a power that then powers some of this. The data centres. So here's a stat. In the UK, data centres already account for about 2.5% of national electricity usage, and that share could quadruple by 2030. And certainly, I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't think it would get to that stage, given the proliferation of AI usage that is happening. More and more people are adopting it in every facet of their life. So I'm going to start with Beth, if that's all right, with some thoughts on this, because it's really interesting. And I'll give you another one as well. The National Energy System Operator estimates that as much as 71 trillion watts of additional electricity demand from the UK data centre expansion over the next 25 years. This is coming. We'll know it's coming. We see the front end of it, which is, I get to put some stuff into ChatGPT, but actually there's a lot that businesses need to think about that happens in the background. Beth, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, totally. And I think no one should be saying that it isn't environmentally free to do this. And there are a lot of headlines out there which will give us some of those big stats, and they're warranted. I think the pace of change, I know, Martin, you keep coming back to that industrial revolution, but that was over 80 years. This is happening at a pace that's just incredibly quick, and they are improving day on day. And so that energy drawing is going to come more. You've got more people using it. And so this is continually, this is only going in one direction. We could say, okay, we shouldn't use it. Okay, great. It's not good for the environment, but it's ultimately, there are going to be ways in which you can improve your carbon footprint. And I think a key thing here, and I think that we always come back to at Addidat, is like, what's the data telling you? And it's not about necessarily a point in time. You actually have to look at the whole model as much as you can, and there's going to be estimates and things. But if I take the example of cars, and this isn't don't go and buy an electric car, but electric cars, yes, they are great. They're much less impactful on a day-to-day basis than a diesel or hybrid car. Even the energy and the battery, creating the battery in the first place, it takes time to give that back. Exactly. And so I think it can be very easy just to look really siloed when we think about the environment, and you want to think about the whole picture, using things like intensity metrics and looking at what's the environmental footprint of a process pre-AI and post-AI, and actually looking at some of that sort of indicative data to understand that there are opportunities to reduce energy. And without getting into those details, there's some really processes and policies that companies can put into place around how they're implementing AI to make sure that there's no duplications. You haven't got everybody watching the same meeting, all doing a summary in their own world. It's actually, do you produce that centrally, and then everybody's got that single summary saved? They're small things, but it will all add up.
That's a really good one, actually, and a very pragmatic and practical one. That's probably, there's people that will be listening to this saying, actually, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I like that one. Anything to build on that, or should we move on to the next statement?
Probably just very briefly to say the important thing is that we're talking about it and we're aware of it in the first instance, because if we're not, then we're not even trying to set a frame for what the implications are, when we know that to all the stats you've just talked about, the counter to it is that we're also hoping that AI is part of the resolution to this, so that it can start to look at how you do more reasoning in and around how data centers are being used, the balancing of them, and in turn to look for where there's inefficiencies, because we've got currently limited ways of doing that. So it's, although there is a net effect cause, we're all part of the resolution to it, which is how we use it, how it can help to mediate itself, and then also what it is that we're choosing to do and where we're deploying it.
The AI tooling that's being created, helping companies understand their climate, particularly on the physical climate impact, which until recently has been very difficult to estimate. And I think generally with ESG, you need to be able to translate risks and opportunities into finances, into money, for it to really resonate and for people to actually take action. And now that data is getting better, and it's still forward-looking predictive. As humans, we're always fighting the last war, right? And it's all about how do we get that forward-looking, sensible projection, although actually with climate, it's not the sensible projection, it's the unlikely ones that will flatten a company. And so you have to actually think about those extremes when you're looking ahead as well. And AI is really helping with that.
Yeah, 100%. Right. Statement number 5. I'm going to start this off with you, sir. Employees don't want AI in their workplace. You haven't actually had businesses say things like that to you, have you?
No, but I'd also say that we've not necessarily, in the clients that we speak to, then we've not always got to all parts of the business to hear that directly from people that might be affected in different ways, to be fair. So again, there's not a one size fits all on this, going back to almost the first statement, which is around the impacts of jobs on jobs. It's going to impact jobs in different ways. And at which point it may well be that we can look at certain jobs that are going to be impacted more immediately in things like translation services. So you can immediately see how that works. But there's skills that come with that. It's going to be a no, but it depends on who you're talking to, the types of roles, the type of skills that are required, and the tasks that people are performing. That's
a really good point. There will be people in more traditional industries that might just be, I can't really see how this is impacting me. I do wonder if there's an element of media bias around that statement. But Beth, what's your view?
I think businesses have been, and it depends on the sector that they're in. I think businesses that are in defence or something where actually it's customer privacy is paramount, I think they've been understandably very reserved about their approach to using it and embedding it in their organisation. And I think even a year ago, you'll have had firms that are like, we don't allow it. I think that is evolving and evolving quickly, because I think the understanding of that actually, if you don't start thinking about it, and I know I think generally when we're talking about AI, we're really talking about the use of ChatGPT and other LLMs, really. AI exists in businesses, it exists in our day-to-day life. It's just LLMs have made it into the conscious, actually what's possible, really broken what we think could potentially be possible. Whereas I think there are a lot of very clever people who have known this for years. But for the general public, this is what's really starting to have an impact and really challenge firms for understanding what it could mean to their business in both an opportunity and a risk perspective. And I think with employees, again, it always comes down to communication, like explaining why you're doing something and making sure you're being really careful about how you're implementing AI and taking them on the journey, and not just employees, but all stakeholders as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it goes back to the bit that we were talking about before, the communication. Yeah. If you deliver it in a certain way, this is how this is going to help you, as opposed to you now have to use this. I've seen some media stories about companies that are saying, we are forcing you to use AI or you're out of a job. That's not really the kind of bring somebody along the journey with you narrative, is it? We're going to move on to statement number 6, which again, in that previous statement, we focus very much on what do the employees want. But this is an interesting one, because this is now looking at it from a board or an investor's point of view. So I'm going to start off with you, Beth, if that's all right. AI decision making is too complex for boards or investors to oversee.
Yes, it is complicated, and I'm not going to pretend that I am an AI expert by any means. And it can be, there are a lot of things going on in the world, and ESG has had a similar sort of challenge, and it's really challenging boards to making sure they keep on top of what's happening and what are the new threats that ultimately the AI does pose, both an opportunity and a risk to firms. And it absolutely has to be on the board agenda. you don't have to be an expert to be able to debate the challenges and the opportunities effectively at the board level. That's what the teams around you are there to ensure, that they're giving you the impact, the opportunities, what can you do, what shouldn't you do, and explaining that clearly and simply, and then for the board to challenge that. And ultimately, it's to follow the same process that boards are really good at. It's understanding how does it impact, what could happen, and then start to try and work through what those financially material implications would be. How are you controlling it? What's the risk management framework? What's the governance? Where does it roll up? Who are the decision makers? Are the right people making those decisions? Are those decisions being logged? With those risks and opportunities, are they being mitigated and realised in the right way? Are they being focused on? I think there's one thing that I read recently that was excellent. That was like, focus on one thing at a time. It can feel really overwhelming, but actually, what's the one process you really need to focus on? And so you identify what's the thing that's actually going to potentially make the biggest impact and go with that first. And then if they're data metrics as much as possible to kind of feed that up and cut through some of that perception that we might have. Data is always very good at providing a clear view.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting as well. So at the time of recording, we've just heard some of the budget talk that's come out, and everything in the UK has been, we've had 10 years of being told that productivity is slow in the UK market, and boards, and particularly when you're talking about operational boards, their responsibility is to, okay, how do we deliver on growth? How do we become more productive? And so this idea that AI decision making is too complex for us, it's these boards, these investors, they are having to look at this because they are trying to find those marginal gains, whatever it is. But Martin, some thoughts around that statement, which is AI decision making is too complex for boards or investors to oversee.
So I think I'm taking it almost the two constituent parts, because they've got different interests, as it were. The board is there to building on what you're saying about the future growth, the protection, and almost the insurance if you've got shareholders, that you are making sure that you're doing the right things by your shareholders, plus the people that are working for you, clearly. So there's a bit strict duty of care within that. So there's an irony to this question, actually, because if you think of what a board really does, and Beth, you were going through it there, what you do is you ask questions, and then you gain a whole set of data from your experts and the people that that you rely on, and then you make a judgment call. Do that with a prompt. We ask a question, we make a judgment call as to whether the data that has gone out looked at all the different aspects. And if I'm smart enough to ask, and I'm not, to go and ask the right types of prompt questions to whatever it is I'm doing, I'm the one with the judgment call at the end. And if you just extrapolate that out to a group of people sat around a table asking the sensible questions, have the right critical thinking, then it's breaking it down to what the board's purpose is, the types of things I have to do. And it's not to come up with answers, but it's to ask questions.
All right, we've got just a couple of minutes left, so I want to get through the last couple of statements. So statement number 7, AI skills are completely new and separate. Let's start with you this time.
Again, it's a real mix of things. There are clearly, if you are heavily technical and you are looking through the developer lens of what you're doing, or even the developer lens is now different, there will be new skill sets that emerge just purely because of the opportunities that I've talked about. Prompting. So the rise of prompt engineering as a core skill set in people's day-to-day lives is going to become critical. The flip of that, though, is the softer skills that we all have will probably be amplified more. So the critical thinking, the types of things that we have as interpersonal skills, because look, humans aren't going anywhere anytime, so we're still going to have to work together. So those types of skill sets that are ultimately still going to be critical. Like any new disruptive technology or factor that we have to deal with as a business environment, then it's going to introduce new ways of working, new ways of thinking. And it's how we then look at what's the most appropriate thing, depending on what your role is, the things you're doing, and equally what the opportunities are with AI.
Yeah, Beth?
Yeah, I think it's totally agree. I imagine when the internet first hit companies, it was employees were like, what is this thing? It's the same. You just need to build it. You just need to start using it. You to encourage, give simple ways, showing how it can really help people do their day-to-day jobs. It can take away some of that really mundane activities like taking minutes and all of that. It's brilliant. I use it to help me with Excel formulas, those sorts of things that previously you could have been trying to work this out by Googling it and whatever. It's like, actually, it gives it to you and gives you an error code. You put the error code in and it fixes itself. And that's what I needed. That's great. And I think the more of those examples you can share, and having those, that sort of the training and the ongoing for everybody across your organization, from the CEO down to the analysts that are walking in the door, I think it's incredibly important. Ultimately, the analysts that are walking in the door, more junior members, are the ones that are going to come in with the incredible skill sets that you're going to want, because they've been using it for a while. It's going to be very natural to them. You want them involved in your AI initiatives, projects, whatever, because they will have ideas beyond what I could even contemplate.
And I was just thinking, as you were giving the example, I'll give an example myself as a collaborative process. If you think about, you're in a meeting, there's lots of people, ideas are flowing everywhere and it's being recorded. Capturing that in minutes is one thing, but then even something simple as grouping them into common themes. Yeah. So that is something that previously, as a marketing person, if we're thinking about content and we've just been doing this process, suddenly you've got all these ideas, okay, but some of these ideas are linked. AI has been able to group into common themes so that we can then structure, okay, now we have something to focus on. Going back to what you said earlier when we were talking about the board stuff, focus on one thing. Yeah. Well, this allows us to be a bit more focused. Okay, final one, and we'll start with you, Beth, which is neuroscience shows AI makes people lazy and forgetful.
I think there is an element of truth in that. Ultimately, there's the risk of losing your intellectual capital in a business, in your employees. I think, again, it comes down to that skill set of using it as a thought partner for doing things and teaching people where its limitations are and how they should engage with it. They should challenge it. They should fact check it. All of that. It can be really helpful for fast streaming certain things, but ultimately you still need that human layer that goes, yeah, got that right, or that doesn't feel right, I'm going to keep digging. And that challenge will actually, I think, help prevent some of that sort of concern.
Nice. Martin?
I do wonder whether we're so early in the cycle of this to actually know what the implications of what over time, how it might change the human brain. And I probably won't be here to find that out. But anyway, so it probably comes down to learning how to use the tool, and also then everybody being aware. Like if I'd had AI at university, then you can see that many people are using it for research purposes. Some maybe that goes a little bit too far, but equally it's getting in at the right point to make sure that people are still going through that critical thought process. And accepting that there's going to be things that you do need to challenge. You don't accept that whatever's being fed to you is exactly what you should take as verbatim. And then being able to go and look at other sources. This is what we used to do when we were looking at primary and secondary sources. If you're writing essays through anyway. So it's just a different source in a way, but it's learning that sort of just to be skeptical and not just take it as accepted. But I'd also then come around to the other things. As much as I'd love my teachers at primary schools to think I still used long division as opposed to using my phone. Does that make me lazy? No, maybe. There's going to be a lot of nuance that sits within this. So I think it's just going to be watching over time, make sure we're still critical in our thinking and just not accepting the facts or not facts that we're fed.
Lovely. Okay. Well, that's it. That's the 8 statements that we've got now. For me, it's been really interesting to get some of the detail behind that, to start looking at some of those common questions and statements that have come up. So Beth, thank you very much for joining me today.
You're very welcome.
Martin, always a pleasure, never a chore.
You're welcome.
Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast as much as we have enjoyed recording it. If you have, please feel free to give us a share it with any colleagues, or if you've got any suggestions for topics, then please feel free to reach out to myself or any of the team. But for now, it's thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the People Agenda podcast. Bye-bye.